Right, lovely. Good evening. Thank you very much for turning up for the June meeting of the Isles of Scilly Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority. And moving on to our first order of business, there is election of chair. Do we have any nominations for chair?
I'd like to nominate Andrew Guy.
Any seconders? Harry, any other nominations? No. Oh, Councillor Guy, I believe you are now chair. The vote. Oh, sorry. To the vote. Sorry. Yeah, pretty unanimous. So yeah, Councillor Guy.
Yeah. Thank you once again for electing me chairman for this coming year. I think it will be my 9th year as chair, and I will do my best for this IFCA. Thank you very much. Agenda item 2, to elect a vice chair. Nominations, please. Harry.
Can I nominate Tim Alsop?
Yeah. Seconder, please.
I'd like to second that.
Robert. Any other nominations? Those in favour of Tim Alsop, vice chair? Unanimous. Thank you, Tim. Tim's supposed to be online and he gives his apologies. He will be at the next meeting, but for unforeseen reasons, he can't be here tonight. Also, I have apologies, sorry, from Seamus Pender. Declarations of interest, please. Number 3. Harry.
I own a commercial fishing vessel for now.
Commercial fisherman, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Commercial fisherman.
Thank you for that. Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 24th of March. Has anyone had a copy and read the minutes? Is everyone happy with the correct record? Proposer to accept them, please. Seconder? Those in favour? Thank you very much. Urgent items. It's getting a bit loud for me. Something I did want to do tonight, and I wanted to do it at the last meeting, but I couldn't because I wasn't sure that Steve Watt wasn't going to stand again for the council. However, Steve has stepped down. After 27 years of working for the authority, from maritime officer, fisheries officer, chief officer, and 8 years as a councillor, he will be sadly missed from this committee. His input, I think, was phenomenal for what he did, what he achieved. And I'd just like to take this moment to thank him for everything he's done. And maybe one day he might come back on this committee. But thank you, Steve, for everything you've done. That's me urgent items done. Part one, requiring decision. The budget monitoring, and I'll hand you over to Colin.
Just a brief one, this one. As you can see, it's the start of the year. No budget monitor, I'm afraid, was available for April and May due to a system glitch at the time. I think they're now available. But basically, as always, that time of year, as noted in the report, there will be several subjectives that are looking fairly unfavourable due to being front-loaded payments. Other than that, but as always, you know, we will expect to be on profile by the end of the year, usually by just moving a few bits of any excess or needed monies from reserve into the revenue budget. You may see this time there is quite a healthy, quite a large amount transfer from reserves. This is basically starting to get into expending against the DEFRA Ardell money and starting to deliver on the requirements of that money. So that's about it for that one.
Any questions for Colin on that? All happy with that one? Thank you for that. Agenda item 7, the Constitution, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Hope all members have read it, but I'll leave Colin have a say on it.
Yeah, this is. I mean, obviously, this is something. The Constitution. We're reviewing the Constitution. In the Constitution, we do need to review it annually, and should be really done at this meeting, with being the AGM of the authority. At this time, there was no consideration for any amendments unless members have anything that they would like to see changed within that and brought back to the next meeting. If anybody's got anything, please sort of like please bring those issues up.
Are all members happy with what's written in the Constitution at this present time? Yeah. What we can do with this document, and it says we'll adopt it if we've got a proposer and a seconder. If any time you read through it and you want to amend it, you can bring it back to committee and we can adjust things, okay? So if you have a proposer to adopt them, please. Nick, seconded. Harry, those in favour? Unanimous, that's good, thank you very much. The annual plan. Colin.
Right, this is a delay to the authority, I'm afraid. This should really come to the authority at the March meeting. Unfortunately, it wasn't prepared in time for that. It's fairly much a standard. I mean, as you can see in there, I've should we say, rationalised some of the ambitious targets that we normally set for the authority. We've had a fairly challenging year, 12 months, and I think we're coming out the end of that now. So certainly built into that plan, we're certainly trying to set up a continued concentration on getting those processes and work streams consolidated again. This will be helped by that additional injection into the revenue budget from the reserves. Again, in line, we've set out some sort of 5 objectives, research priorities, get continuation of some works and some more work, some new works in there. So yeah, it's a fairly straightforward document. I hope, if anyone's got any questions about it or consider anything is missing or would like any amendments, then please, bring them up.
From the chair, this is an important document. The annual plan of this IFCA is what our team do, what they exercise throughout the year. So if there are any amendments at a later date you wish to change or come back, we could do it at another meeting, but just to emphasise, it is an important document. Jules.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. In the actual plan, you've clarified it later in the plan, but in the introduction on page 2 of the actual plan, it says that by the end of 2024, that all the MPA assessments and management where required had been completed. And you do clarify that there are still some outstanding a bit later on, and in the report previous you did, it's just that comment isn't quite.
Yes, I get that. Yeah, the assessments themselves have been completed, but they haven't been finalised. So that's probably,
Okay.
should have made that clearer. Sorry. Yeah,
No, that's fine.
I can
It
amend
clarifies
that.
it later, but
Yeah,
just
I can amend that.
Okay, thanks, Colin.
Sorry, that's an oversight, that one, sorry.
Any other comments on the annual plan from members? No? Can we have a proposal then? We accept them? Robert, seconder? Jules, those in favour? Thank you, unanimous. That is covered the annual plan call. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bring in agenda item 11 a minute, the measuring and balance project, because we've got Simon online. I think it'd be handy to do that agenda item now, if that's okay. So shall I hand it to you to?
Well, yeah, sure. Obviously, this is something that predates me. Most of the work was carried on before I was here, so I'm not as clued up. So obviously Simon led the project on behalf of the association. So if I can have Simon to present the update of the final parts of the project. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Chairman. I have a little presentation for you. I promised Colin it would be short, but we'll see how we go. He knows I like to talk. I'll see if I can get it up. But yeah, in the meantime, I came to you, I met most of you about 15 months ago now. I came to your authority meeting in April. It's the last one, Tom's last authority meeting, and we talked about this measuring balance project at that meeting, and announced it really as part of a project that was going to be considered and included in year 3 of the Marine Natural Capital and Ecosystem Assessment Programme under Natural England's projects. So yeah, it was the MNCEA programme has now come to an end. Year 3 of the programme was last year, and we completed the project. So I was just going to give you a quick run through of the project and let you know where we're at now. So yeah, you see there's quite a few people worked on this. It was led by Natural England. I was working with Natural England on the project. We obviously had staff from Scilly, IFCA and Natural England on it as well. And then we had contractors from Newcastle University and Bayes Consulting doing parts 1 and part 2 of the project. So the Measuring Balance project was born originally from a concept developed by Tom. And as a chief officer, he spent a lot of time thinking about how the IFCA's actions were helping to meet its duties in delivering sustainable fisheries, but also a healthy marine environment and meeting the social and economic needs of the community. So Tom was confident that Ulster City IFCA was achieving an appropriate balance, but he wanted to understand how it could be measured and to also support future decision making and reporting. And the appropriate balance is really rooted in the needs of the community, and it's likely to be varied by region as well. For example, things like the heritage and geography and fisheries and customs in a place like the Isles of Scilly will influence how the community values its fisheries and its marine environment, and sort of therefore determine where an appropriate balance lies. So the project itself was split into 2 parts, and the first part was aimed at gathering data for engaging with the community on the Isles of Scilly. The objective was, through a series of in-depth interviews with members across varying sectors of the community, was to really understand the social, economic and environmental targets relating to IFCA fisheries management decisions. And so you had Ainsley and Phoebe came over in 2024, last autumn, and spent a couple of weeks on the Scillies. They were under contract from Newcastle University. They spoke with a lot of people and carried out 26 in-depth interviews with people ranging from interest in the fishing industry, recreational fishers, people who are involved in businesses linked to fishing or the supply chain with fisheries, right through to people who just got an interest in things like wildlife watching. And through the analysis of the data they gathered, they developed a total of 34 subheading targets relative to the Isles of Scilly community. And it's important that these targets were measurable using the data that was available or that could be gathered. So targets relating to things like categories relating to economic, environmental, social areas, but also actually the governance of the marine region as well. So here's just an example of one of the 34 measurable considerations and the considerations that flowed from the community interviews. In this case, we're looking at how an IFCA management decision could impact income relating to commercial fishing business viability. And under this consideration, there's a range of questions to help reach a measured impact conclusion. So then under the second part of the project, we used the results of the community data gathering exercise with those definable targets to develop a reporting and decision support tool. And the brief for this was to develop a method that could be easily picked up and used by an IFCA without the need for specialist software or complex equations, producing some really visual images that display the impact of an IFCA management decision across these 3 main areas: the economic, environment, and social. And importantly, how impact across these contrasting areas could be balanced or were balanced. So the project team working on this were Bayes Consulting. They're very mathematical, and working with the Scilly team, the project developed suitable test case scenarios and set about gathering the relevant data to consider these scenarios. We initially explored MCZ management scenarios, but finally we worked on a final working scenario relating to pollock quota management. I'll give you a little bit more on that in a bit. So what we had to help work through the relevant impact of these scenarios was an Excel spreadsheet, which the project team developed, with each measurable consideration mapped out. And then working through the available data for the individual considerations, the user was able to determine an appropriate impact score. And the score determined whether the decision would have a positive or a negative impact on the community and also the extent of that impact. And it was also possible to weight the impact of the different considerations relevant to their overall importance. However, in this case, for these scenarios, we weighted everything equally. We developed a scoring system with 5 different categories for the impact scores based on a traffic light system. Then we developed 2 different visualization tools. The first one's this donut wheel, which is similar to that used by the Cornwall Council. The donut wheel shows, it's got 2 segments, an inner and an outer, and shows the relative impact for each of the measurable consideration areas, together with the overarching impact in the outer segment of the 3 category areas. This tool is good for showing how the impact of a decision blends across the 3 different categories, starting to visualize how balanced the impacts may or may not be. Unfortunately, at this stage of the development, the tool doesn't easily allow for the viewer to understand which measurable consideration each of the inner segments relates to, but it's a really good overall visual impact, which I'll show you with one of the examples in a bit. And then the second tool we developed was a decision tree map, really helping to delve into each of the impacts within the measurable consideration. So we've got labeled segments in a 3-tier cascade system, and the sizes of the segments can be varied as well according to their weighting and the relative scores assigned to each impact. So as I said, once we developed the tools, the team focused on testing the process through the test scenarios. So the final test scenario was a pollock quota management scenario. We worked up with Colin and his team, and really this assessed the impact of a 0 tax scenario on the Scilly fleet versus a second scenario whereby 250 kilos monthly hook and line quota was allowed to the local fleet. Members will know the value of pollock as a fishery to the Scilly community. This was a particularly interesting test scenario to use as significant values run through the fishery into the island-based market supply chain, with really good community-based participation in the recreational fishery as well. So working through this scenario, the tool prompted some important in-depth consideration of the measurable areas, particularly over the in-combination community impacts. For example, when considering the long-term potential positive impacts of stock recovery, it was difficult to determine really how this could be felt by the Scilly fishing community, commercial fishing community, if that community had been starved for several years prior to one of its most significant income opportunities, i.e. they couldn't catch pollock. Would there be any boats left to actually realise the benefits at the end of it? So it made us really think about sort of the in-combination effects and how we attribute positive versus negative impact to a decision. This is just one of the examples really that we considered. So scooting on to the results, is a nice visual of the end result. There's a lot more in the final report, which is currently going through DEFRA review. But the donut images here for each of the 2 pollock scenarios show quite a contrast in how the management decision could impact the Ulster City community. The zero tax scenario on the left shows an overall negative impact in the economic and social sectors, particularly in the economic, where there's some of these deep reds, where this relates to a severe negative impact. And the environment sector is shown to potentially experience a positive impact, and this is most obviously related to potential stock recovery. Overall, though, it would be difficult to say this management decision on the left would be balanced across the three categories. For the scenario on the right, the 250 kilo monthly catch allowance, the impact is likely to be more positively felt across the community, particularly in some of these social and economic impacts, with a general positive effect. There's more of a neutral effect in the environment sector that's likely to be associated with a slower stock recovery. However, there will still be potential for some recovery of the stocks, particularly if applied with sort of wider pollock measures outside of the IFCA area. But in general, I would say this scenario on the right was far more balanced across the three sectors, with less of the sort of the harsh greens and the harsh reds, particularly the harsh reds we're wanting to avoid. And I think really this helps visualize the impact of two management decisions run alongside each other. So the process really of working through these scenarios has demonstrated how the approach could be used between different groups of people. I think whilst we set out to work towards Tom's objectives of helping a chief officer understand balance, actually the application of this tool could be much wider. And in particular, I think we felt that there's real benefits of using the tool with members, between officers, and also actually with officers working through with sort of community groups, small groups of commercial fishermen, to understand some of the finer details of particular management decisions. This process can only aid transparency in decision making, which is an important thing for IFCAs to consider. The tool's not being developed to provide a yes/no indication of a management approach, rather to enable full consideration of benefits and costs. And the testing process really shows how the tool sparks conversation and actually helps highlight areas that need new data capture. So there's an opportunity for further development of the approach with the IFCAs. It'd be great to take this forward with an IFCA in a real case scenario, and to see how it works for them, whether it's with the Ulster Scilly using the data which is bespoke to the Ulster Scilly, or with another IFCA. And potentially the tool could also be applied, I think, in the wider marine decision-making context. So at the moment, the report's under review from DEFRA. They're going through all of the natural capital reports before publishing. I hope it'll be published soon. Yeah, once it is published, I will of course bring it straight back to the Ulster City for their consideration as well. But yeah, in the meantime, I hope to sort of talk further with the IFCAs about this project, and the chief officers and the technical advisory group, see whether there's further potential for uptake with it. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Simon, for that presentation. Quite an in-depth project, as we can see. Have members got any questions while he's online to ask him anything while we're here? Robert.
Simon, can I just ask whether you considered the massive impact of seals sweeping up, the vast amount of juvenile fish, including pollock, and how that impacts all this, rather than just considering hand lining, which in my view, for what it's worth, is a very low impact fishery, and I'm just wondering whether you actually considered, you know, we've obviously got a vast population of seals here now, and you know, what they consume in a year has got a you know, a huge effect on the juvenile stock around the island. So I just wondered whether you've considered that. Thank you.
Well, yeah. So the scenarios developed were designed to test a potential IFCA management decision. So we're focusing on a hypothetical decision to manage a fishery to really test this approach and develop the model. But the measurable considerations gave consideration for a whole load of factors relating to the impact on the marine environment or the impact of increased stocks in the food chain and food chain impact. So yes, from that perspective, there's potential to consider that and that to be part of the outcome demonstrated.
Nick.
Hi, Simon. It's Nick.
I know.
Not a question, it's actually, but an observation, really. I thought the pollock example is a really good one to use, especially if you're talking to fishermen, because what could be a fairly dry presentation comes to life when you start showing reds against pollock and so on. So I say certainly for fishermen, and I mean it may well be that because I mean I know seals aren't relevant to this, but around the country everybody's talking about seals. It could well be that that's one of the things that in the future we look at, and there's lots of reds in the economic side of leaving seals alone and so on. So yeah, it could be useful.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, credit to Cole in that situation. It was his idea to bring forward that scenario because it was really at the point when we were developing the project. It was really relevant to, well, it still is, but it was really relevant to the Scillies. The pollock measures had just been brought in. So what we wanted to do is to bring something to life for the IFCA, but also actually something which could be useful for the decision makers at DEFRA to show how the sort of two different management scenarios could have sort of hugely different impacts, but actually potentially create the same sort of result, which would be stock recovery in one form or another.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I may. I take it this at the moment the model's purely been talked about on Scilly. You haven't sort of looked at it or tested it in any other IFCAs at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. I think Nick, it would be really useful actually in a fisheries management plan scenario where DEFRA is thinking about different management approaches for FMP stocks, things like whelks. Would be great for them to actually understand sort of in particular the impact on the smaller sector and so particularly where that community impact comes to the fore.
Harry.
Thank you, Simon, and everyone who's worked on this. I think it's really interesting that sort of the comparisons that you made earlier to the decision wheel for Cornwall Council, which is now spread around the country and been adopted by a lot of authorities. And then for the IFCA, we're potentially one of the first to adopt sort of this approach here, and yet we haven't adopted what's been adopted elsewhere for the wider authority. And I mean, I would certainly support this approach with the sort of understanding that, like you say, it's to aid discussion and sort of highlight areas for debate rather than it just being, you know, green means yes, red means no. There's nuance, and without a lot of data to support a number, those numbers are up for debate. So, I mean, I would support this as it stands, and would be happy to propose the recommendation.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you once again, Simon, for that presentation and answering the questions from members. Have we got a seconder, please? Robert, those in favour of the recommendation? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and hopefully see you in person sometime.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
Right, Simon, thank you very much. Agenda item 9, review of the fishing gear permit bylaw. Colin.
Yeah, this one's sort of come about, as you're aware, after many years of your hard work. The fishing gear permit bylaw 2021 came into force at the end of last year. And with that, obviously with the associated permit conditions, certain things have changed over time in that. Particularly, as you can see in paragraph 7 there, certain things like the permit conditions as they stand specify particular IVMS units that are required. Now, 2 of those units are now no longer available. They're not on the type approval. So it's probably not reasonable to suggest that somebody has 1 unit. So hence those changes. And other things in terms of adding very specific about specified equipment. You know, there is DEFRA projects looking towards the implementation of an introduction of remote electronic monitoring methods in terms of imaging and remote sensing. So it would, potentially sensible to include that in the bylaw, because as an IFCA we could move slightly more swiftly. There are 2 there, particularly for scalloping, which may have been considered before, but I couldn't find any reference to. Which is, given that we have a maximum number of dredges set at 6, potentially that the bar length should only be 3 to take about 3 meters to take 3 dredges, and also to sort of like be consistent with Devon and Severn district and Cornwall district to have a curfew as such, so only fishing between 0700 and 1900 local time. So these are sort of proposals potentially to be discussed, and whether any amendments to those at all, amendments to those suggestions. And then obviously because they're permit conditions, we then are obliged to go out to consultation. It's a slightly different process to a bylaw. We just go out for consultation and then take on board any responses, particularly from stakeholders. So it's basically around about a discussion as to how, as members, you feel the amendments fit and future-proof the permit conditions, and if there's any other amendments or amendments to those suggested changes. If anyone's got any points on those, please, please shout.
I think 12 covers it, Cole, when you said the proposed amendments will future-proof the bylaw permit conditions whilst different improving management. Any members got any points on this with the update of it? Are we happy for a proposer? You want a bit more time to think on it? Members, this is so we can go out to consultation I think we need to approve it, but it's up to you. Have you got any feelings on it? Emily?
Just a question from me. Do we have any information on how many vessels are actually using dredges in the district?
Currently none, although I have issued a permit to 1.
Thank you.
Harry?
I think, like, as you say, this is to go out to consultation. We're not yet approving these amendments, so I would like more information from the community on their thoughts on it. So yeah, I would approve this for consultation.
Thank you. And
Yeah, I mean, it is part of the process. We can't just change them. We do have to go out to consultation. Yeah, I mean, you started this process a long time ago, and things have naturally changed in that time. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think I think you started on the journey in 2018. So that's not surprising. Things have changed since then.
So we've got a proposal, a second. Those in favour to carry on? Yeah, unanimous. Thank you, Colin. That gives you the go ahead for that.
Good for me.
Number 10 is I'm going to hand you to Colin, and then I think we'll have a discussion on it. I think is where we need to be. So I'll hand you to Colin first. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, Chairman. Yeah, this is genuinely a discussion point more than anything else as to how the authority wants to proceed. If you remember, in December, I presented a similar paper based around the fishing gear permit bylaw 2013, and we had quite a good discussion around it. And then 24 hours later, we discovered that bylaw was going to be revoked in 2 weeks. So after all that discussion, obviously we've come back to it. So the policy as was has been amended to suit the current bylaw. Now within that, there is a section in the bylaw that states that the authority may issue a permit. Doesn't mean it's obliged to, but on legal advice, we need to have a policy in place to if the authority wishes to restrict the number of permits that are issued in any period. It is possible to do so, but it has to have a policy and criteria upon which to base that restriction. So within this, I mean, this paper really was more about getting yourselves to think about whether you feel it's appropriate to set a limit, or you feel that the permit conditions would actually restrict the activity to a point where it would be considered to be acceptable. So in many respects, I think if we open up for discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions or anything.
So firstly, from the chair, today I took half an hour to ring Tim to find out how his wife was, have a chat, catch up, and this is my main. I'm concerned about if we do or don't or set a limit, because I think it's something very important for this district. Tim was of the same understanding, and Tim said he wouldn't mind me saying in his absence that he would be happy with the start permitting 3, not a maximum 3, and then review as time goes on, but we set it at 3. So that's as far as I've got. So I would just opinion of members now, please. Sorry.
No, sorry, I think I would say on that is if we set it, a number now today would have to be preliminary.
Yeah, which is fine.
Based on potentially the results of the Plymouth University work.
But it is asking us in the recommendation, it's pretty clear. It says, and set a maximum number of permits for the year 25-26. So it's up to members where they want to go with it. But yeah. So we go this way around. Yeah.
Sorry, thanks.
Emily.
So I'm hesitant to set a number, because what are we basing that number on? It needs to be based off of the impact of bottom-towed gears. That's what it states in the permit bylaw. We don't have, as far as I'm aware, a full understanding of that here in Scilly yet, because that hasn't been understood. We run the risk of, if you set a limit now, that if someone applies who's outside of that limit, fishing boat number 4, fishing boat number 5, for instance, how we then defend that position legally, I'm not quite sure. If we just set an arbitrary number. I would like to see maybe compliance history considered in permit conditions, or whether we could consider compliance history in the issuing of permits. I'm not quite sure where that compliance would be considered, for instance, whether it could be considered if someone has got previous infringements within the district, can that be considered when issuing permits? And then, yeah, I'm just hesitant, I think, to set a number, because I think we need to understand really what the kind of carrying capacity is for bottom towed gear here in Scilly. And I don't think we have any understanding of that at the moment.
In just personally from me, then, in the past 9 years, we had a trawler, a local trawler. There was no one else applied for it. When he finished, the licence ceased and the boat left the district. That now already we've got 2 permits allocated in that certain area. So that's where we are at the moment.
And just to clarify as well, a maximum length applies.
Yes.
Of I can't remember what it is. The maximum
Vessel
length.
size.
Yeah.
We've got 11 metres length overall.
And I'm
not
just
registered length overall, and 10 tonnes weight. Registered
I'm just
weight.
thinking then, really, in terms of, we don't have very many under 11 metre trawlers really in Cornwall that really could visit and fish regularly. So I do think there is a relatively small risk here. However, we need to manage it correctly. So yeah, I just think very stringent permit conditions, and maybe whether we could consider compliance history in the allocation of permits. Thanks.
Okay, Nick.
Sure. Did you say it was for this year you set the number of permits? Is it something we can change every year?
These permits at the moment are for the next 2 years, so 25, 26. And at the moment there are 2.
But if we set a limit, will that be in perpetuity, or will we revise that? Is it revised on the 5-year review of the bylaw?
That is a good question.
It would have to be for 2 years, because the permits are issued for 2 years.
Yeah. So 2 permits after 2 years, a review, I would imagine. Yeah.
I mean, my personal view is that it's pretty much academic. I don't think we're going to get more than 1 or 2 people. And historically, there isn't enough ground for more than 2 trawlers here, really, anyway.
Yeah. So
economically, they would. I mean, but in effect, economically, the scalloping is, and those non-starter with 3 dredges and so on. So, but I would have no limits to setting but no objection to setting a limit on numbers.
All right.
I agree with both the sort of sets of comments that have been made. There's very little evidence for setting any number, but I think it would be foolish to not set a number at the same time. The issue being that we don't have any reason for choosing that number, other than, as Nick says, historically, the ground hasn't supported more than 2 vessels. So based on that, I would suggest putting a number of 3 for this year. And we are only being asked for this year.
Yeah.
So therefore I would assume that we would be reviewing that next year, because we're only being asked for this year. So therefore more permits could be issued next year for 2 years starting next year. And we could have perhaps some further information and research in that time.
We'll let Colin come back a minute. Yeah.
Can I suggest then that would probably require a recommendation for amendment to recommendation for amendment to the recommendation? Let's go around in circles. That's correct, Andrew. And that would need to be amended. There would need to be an amendment recommendation.
Are you happy to go with that, everybody? Yeah. Sorry, Robert.
I'm just going to say, Emily was mentioning that we need sort of
Legal.
the data to be able to set our reasoning of why we've gone for that number. Can we not go about researching that do we have to do the number now? I mean, I can't remember what you said. I'm sorry about the reason for wanting a number, but if we need really to confirm this with some data and some, exploration of why we've chosen that number, then I think that's a piece of work we perhaps should do.
Actually, sorry, can I just, I'm trying to get it straight in my own head. Are we talking about writing this number into the bylaw, or just having a number that the committee sets that we review every year or two?
It would be for the year or the 2 years.
Yeah, it would be a review process, as in the policy, rather than changing the bylaw.
Jules, you were next.
Yeah, it was just to go back to that point that Emily made about, and Robert's made about, the number of permits must be dictated by the interpretation and application of information around the impact of bottom-towed gears. And how is that assessment, how will it work in practice in terms of, again, setting a number now, how we're not basing that decision on what we know to be the impact of an increased number of permits. So how the policy talks about commissioning or carrying out surveys or doing lit reviews. I'm just wondering how that would work in practice.
It is tricky. I guess possibly some middle ground between members could be that we are awaiting the reporting from Plymouth University, what they've done. So that could be used as part of the evidence towards setting a figure. So yeah, I mean, it's for members to decide.
Emily, you want to come in again?
Sorry, Jules made my point. Thanks.
No.
I'm trying to remember my own point a second. Yeah, coming back to the impact of bottom-towed gears, unless somebody is towing gear on the bottom here, how do we assess that impact? It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Unless there's any study elsewhere in the country that can say X number of trawlers on X square miles of ground, it makes an impact or whatever. I don't know if anything like that is available, but at the moment, without any trawlers here, we can't assess the impact.
The only existing thing that I know of was the tool that Bangor worked on, Claire Shostek did some years ago, which we've used extensively, Income we've used extensively in the assessment process, that gives values, etc., for the number of passes of gear, certain gear.
Emily.
Obviously that's just one metric of bottom-towed gears, so the impact doesn't necessarily have to just be on the bottom. The impact could also be the amount of fish taken from an area. So we could use catch data to establish kind of how much catch we want coming from this area, for instance. So getting some kind of estimate for actually impact on the bottom might be difficult, as you say, but actually gathering information on how much is actually taken from Scilly is actually quite simple with IVMS data and logbook data. So maybe that is something that we could look at doing quite easily, is looking at the amount that's actually taken by these trawlers that are fishing here, and kind of thinking about what we might consider to be too much or not enough, basically. How you set those limits, though, I don't know.
Harry.
Just to be clear in my head, the policy for issuing permits is already proposed and in effect. The only decision placed before us is on setting a number.
Or not.
Or not.
Yeah.
Or not setting a number.
Recommendation.
Can I propose that we defer that decision until the information from Plymouth is presented to us?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, sorry. Coming back to impact again, Emily says it doesn't have to be impact on the bottom, it could be impact on the number of fish caught or whatever. Could it be impact on other fisheries? Because I know 20, 30 years ago, whenever the scalloping hit us hard, it ruined the ground for crawfish netting for years. And we have a very substantial crawfish netting fishery here, which will be in the same sort of area that some of this certainly scalloping would be and some of the trawling would be, and it could have a huge impact on that fishery issuing any permits. So could that be relevant?
Come back on that one.
No, it certainly could be included in any sort of assessment process. How we would do that, again, we would have to look back to catch data and effort data as well, because obviously catch data is not particularly useful and, you know, can't always be taken as any sort of indication.
I'm just sort of thinking ahead, and perhaps when we do some of the data collection of crawfish and so on through the summer, it could be specifically in the areas where trawling is proposed to assess what's there now.
So I got this right, that members are going to consider the policy, but we will set the number of permits at a later date. Is that what we're?
Well,
Or not set a limit.
So that's just an amendment, Chairman, I think.
Do you want to go for that for an amendment? I'm going to come from the floor then.
Vote on the amendment.
I think we should look for more data.
Okay.
To be able to make
An informed
decision. You've got the word.
It's quite full of
Bills.
If we were to take that approach, how would that leave us if we were to end up with more applications for permits? What would the authority?
I would suggest we have no legal standing to refuse.
That's if we don't set a limit today. That's what I was thinking. That's why I'm a little concerned.
Even if we have a limit, we still don't really have the legal right to refuse because we don't have the scientific basis for that limit. So the limit is almost pointless, I would say, at this point in time, until we have a scientific reason to set that limit. That's
Right. Can you hear us, Tim?
Yes, I can.
Do you want to come in and say something then, please?
Yeah, I'm listening to that discussion, and as usual, I sort of go back in history a little bit. We did a lot of work with Plymouth Marine Labs back now quite a lot of years ago, and we went across when there was trawling here, and we went across the areas we trawled that was trawled a lot, and some of them were stunningly destroyed, compared with surrounding grounds. But what we didn't know at the time, and no one does, was how many trawlers have been over that ground to cause it to be like that. Was it 1, 2, 20? And often it was an unknown. And it appears to me we've got a chance to sort of build up information by checking the ground after, say, 3 or 4 or whatever is decided, are put in areas. So it sounds as though we could make it into better science, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. Yeah, we can certainly now we have the luxury with the introduction of IVMS as a requirement. We certainly have that ability now to monitor effort, and we can actually see what level of activity has actually occurred within the district. So we are in a very fortunate position that where a permit has been exercised so far, which was before the coming into force of the IVMS, the permit holder has been nothing but helpful and has given access to all of his data. So we have that in place, and now
and he's landed.
And his catch data for that period when he was working in the district as well. We have the track data, catch data, and now, I say with IVMS, anybody else coming in, we can monitor it.
Emily.
Does Tim want to come back on any of that before I come in?
No, fine, thank you.
Just also a thought on the conditions of the permit, and thinking about the enforceability of those conditions, because if we could make the permit conditions quite stringent. You could think about things like mesh sizes, technical conservation measures to make this, I mean, relatively like unappealing, I suppose, if people have to use different mesh sizes. But you then need to think about the enforceability of that, and does the authority have the capacity to undertake kind of regular sort of boardings of these vessels to make sure that the gear is inspected and that they're using, you know, that side of things? Are those technical conservation measures considered in this?
They weren't originally, but could be. We're now in a position that we do have that capacity to operate in line with current legislation for the operation of the boat. So yeah, it is possible, but you know, as you know, with anything, you know, it's having to be there at the right time. But you know, we do now have a much better means of being able to target, you know, really target and be risk-based on those enforcement of compliance monitoring patrols.
I think we've had quite a discussion. Are we happy then that the recommendation will read that members have considered the policy of limiting permits, but are not setting a limit at this present time until more data comes forward? Something like that would that be a happy proposal for everybody that they're comfortable with? Jules.
So just a question around the more data becoming available, and setting, I don't know, some kind of commitment to that. We've got obviously the Plymouth University of Plymouth IFCA study going on, and we're just about managed to get the funding for it for the after part of that. But in terms of the long-term monitoring of the impact, do we need to think about? I mean, I notice in the document it talks about the IFCA bearing responsibility for the survey work and the costings for that, because obviously if we've got the project this year for Baki, what about the future, and how will that be serviced by the IFCA?
Budgetarily, we're in a position, as you may have seen in the budget monitor, I've shifted and basically called on reserves to allocate for bespoke survey work that we might have to call on to do this work with. That's not going to last forever, but in the interim, I would suggest that we have indication that the Ardell money will be available, will be given to us again for this year. Again, probably not till the end of the financial year, as these things usually happen. So, you know, we have had a build up of that money in reserve, so it will follow on, you know, for possibly the next couple of years, because we're you know, because you can't, there are deliverables against that money. This work fits into those deliverables, but I can't be in a position where I am setting budget requirement for it in that year, in case, because it's not 100% guaranteed. So, you know, that is why we've always worked in arrears, if you like, where, you know, money's received in last financial year, we are spending against this year.
Have we got any more conversations on this? We could put a proviso on that we bring this back to committee in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever. If you'd rather do that when we've got more data, would that be an option to add that on? Yeah. So we've addressed it, but not actually issued a number.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I keep doing this to you, because I mean that point 7. It's evident that the authority may decide to set a maximum number of permits, and then it's dictated by interpretation and application of information. Does legal opinion say that we should set number of permits or may. And I mean, you know, can we say we don't have the information, therefore we can't set a limit? Is are we covering ourselves with doing that?
We've had a conversation with Fred, haven't we?
Yeah, I have had legal, obviously sought legal advice on this rather than to do this on, right. And yeah, may does allow the word may enables the authority to do that, but it's not, you have to have good criteria upon which to base any restriction.
Criteria to make a restriction, but do we need criteria to not make any restrictions? If are we failing our duty by not putting a restriction in there?
One could argue, from my perspective, I'm coming in after the bylaw process. I've come in right at the end of it as it was being considered by DEFRA. Looking through, I haven't seen any notes of looking at restricting numbers at that point. Although the authority didn't issue permits for a number of years anyway.
No. And actually, I mean, I'm just thinking of, is the restriction of number of permits just at that point in time? It's just a snapshot in time. Presumably we can reserve the right to restrict those permits in the future or whatever. So do we actually need to make a judgment on, yes, we will do this, or can we just say we will review this annually or whatever and restrict if we feel it necessary?
I think that's where we're heading. I think the recommendation should read that the members have considered the policy on issuing permits and numbers of. However, we will bring it back to committee in 9 months' time for consideration with more data. Is on them lines? Is that what members are comfortable with? But we will have in 9 months. We'll have a lot more data, won't we? Surely.
That was the question I was just about to ask. What is that data? Where's it going to come from? Who's going to be collecting it and pulling it together?
Will be a good starter.
True, but Tim obviously has dive surveys, but who's going to be doing catch data? Who's going to be doing spatial data? How is this actually going to be pulled together?
The catch data will come to us automatically, won't it, from the permits?
No, it doesn't. We don't ask. We don't.
But they give it to us, don't they?
Yeah. I've called on people's goodwill so far. That could be, going back to the previous, that could be a change to the permit conditions that we do ask for data. It is available. It is available by
me.
the UK statistics, by you, yes, but by the UK.
But it has to come through like data requests, and it's not instant for you guys. And I think having that data available to you is essential. And whether we can make updates to permit conditions, almost, I don't know how quickly does a permit condition have to be? Can that just be issued? Does that have to go through any sort of?
No, it does literally go up for consultation. Then I think the authority will then make an informed decision of whether they become the new permit conditions.
Yeah.
I will take advice on that to make sure we're absolutely proper.
Yeah, I guess my main concern is that in 9 months' time, I don't want to be sat here having the same conversation because we've not actually collated the data as a authority and made a collective sort of effort to pull this together. And I think between everyone here, there's enough brains and people in the know to pull this relevant stuff together. But we actually need a plan of action, and we need to come back in 9 months with that.
What I could commit to is putting my other hat on. I could charter myself. I've identified funding to cover these situations. As you saw, I put 20k into that subjective in the budget. We could utilise some of that to use some shared IFCA resources to carry out additional work to Plymouth. I know where the tracks are, where the trawl tracks were.
I think having a collated data pool of spatial usage, patch data, and then putting that all together to build a bit of an understanding, maybe alongside dive surveys as well.
Yeah, but we've also, I mean, that's going to be tricky sites to dive. I would have thought. Tim would probably be different, but it's quite deep. I fancy it's not going to be. Yeah, it's not going to be an easy job there. But we've got. There is, as you know, Emily, with shared IFCA camera systems, that professional camera systems that we use. That on my other hat on, that I do manage one of them. So I can do some data collection in that respect. Luckily now we are in a position where we have a fixed term appointment, and that could fit into their work streams to do looking at the catch, looking at activity, monitoring activity. It's not been massively onerous so far, but it could be.
Thanks.
So-
And I guess, sorry to just keep going on, but we'll still always struggle because we don't have a baseline to compare it to.
Yeah.
So we're going to get all this data, which is going to be good, but we're still not.
Do.
As in-
Plymouth, yeah, we
Oh,
basically
sorry, yeah.
started.
Sorry,
That was
yeah,
started.
you do.
We did the initial. We did the baselines with Plymouth. We were,
Yeah, I did know
Tom
that. Sorry.
Pritchard as formalin, and we did that. We did that back in 2019,
22
23.
22 and 23, but we didn't get the grab data, that as much grab data as we'd have liked, but we
No.
do have the still images and
So it's more gross so it'd be more gross, the evidence of gross interaction rather than the real detail in terms of infauna, certainly epifauna rather than infauna.
and the tracks have been used for the survey this year, which were done in June, so we should have the final report from that by the end of March.
I know how much of an overlap there was, so that's why I'm tempted to
Okay.
offer up
Okay.
doing a bit more.
Right, Robert, you've been very patient.
Sorry.
Sorry, Robert.
I was just going to try and simplify things, Mr. Chairman, because clearly we don't feel that we can set a number at the moment. We feel we need to get more scientific data. We also need to look at obviously how we're going to achieve that, and whether indeed at the end of that we will then want to set a number or not. So I think we should do as you suggested and defer, and not necessarily stick a time limit on it, because how long is a piece of string? I think we should let the officers explore it further and work out what we can achieve and when, and then bring it back to IFCA after that. Thank you.
I'm comfortable with that, Harry.
You at the start of the meeting, you referenced Steve Watt, who is no longer on the committee. I believe if he was here, he would be bringing up the precautionary principle that if extensive scientific knowledge is lacking, then you should proceed with caution and err on the side of not causing harm. There's a lot of talk about deferring. I think if we defer until next year, and so there's no limit for this year. I think that's probably the right approach, but purely because I think it's unlikely we're going to get 20 trawlers suddenly decide to apply for a permit and all have one go trawling each. So I think we can safely do that, and I'm happy to propose deferring, like Robert says, until we have some data.
Yeah, I think we've had a very good debate. So those who are in favour, but I've opposed a seconder, unanimous. For that. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to agenda item 12, Natural England, and hand you over to Jules. Thank you. Also, thank you two ladies for turning up today, taking the effort to come over and see us. We do appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. So yeah, this is just detailing a few points, some of which you'll have heard possibly before, but it's just to give you an opportunity to ask me any queries. The first point is just to highlight that we have published recently the Natural England Strategic Direction for 2025 to 2030. And this basically sets out the priorities and the vision to enable sustainable economic growth, which is the government's main agenda, whilst achieving nature recovery. It highlights how Natural England will need to change to help meet those priorities. And the actual strategy, which will detail how we're going to do that, will come out in the autumn. Over the next few months, we'll need to work out what we need to do, and this will be quite heavily shaped by government reviews and also funding decisions that have been made. Moving on to survey and monitoring, the State of the Meadows 2024 is in draft at the moment, so it's not yet published. But the condition of the long-term monitored beds in Scilly still continues to be excellent, although one thing that this report has highlighted this year is a small but upward trend in wasting disease. But it's more about the wasting disease. It's pretty small, and it's more about the fact that we've got that long-term data, which is starting to show that that's becoming a bit of an upward trend. We just looked at a snapshot this year, it wouldn't be an issue, but because we've got that long-term data, that helps identify that. It's pretty poorly understood what the small-scale impacts of wasting disease are, and we're working with Jim Bull to provide further survey data from elsewhere around the country to help investigate that further. If you want to, we've got a bit of a backlog on publications at the moment, but we should hopefully within the next 12 months get that report published. In the meantime, the 2023, I've put a link into the agenda pack for the 2023 report, which is published. We've touched on the University of Plymouth, the before after control and impact study. We've secured the funding for this financial year, and I think Colin's report touches a bit more on this as well, so I won't dwell on that. MPA condition monitoring, I've mentioned this in previous meetings and our aspirations for monitoring over the next couple of years. We've got confirmation now of our work plan, and we've got the Isles of Scilly SPA, special protection area, that will be taken through formal condition assessment process this financial year, as well as the specific feature of seagrass within the SAC we'll look at. And then finally, the MPA network review. I don't know how many people have picked up on that, but DEFRA are currently undertaking the review of the MPA network to see if sites are in the right places with the right protection. And I think there's going to be opportunity for stakeholders to be engaged with that process with DEFRA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jules. Just really, how do you think sort of like budgetary impacts are going to affect your condition assessments, the condition assessment process? I mean, in many respects, we're looking at probably more desk-based reviews.
I think we've got one of our priorities is doing the condition assessments to help inform the Environment Improvement Plan targets. We've always had challenges around securing budget for direct monitoring. A lot of the monitoring, I mean, with the SPA, if we're talking Scilly specifically, the SPA, we have good data, which is why we're selecting that site to monitor and to assess, because we've had the recent All Island Seabird surveys. So we have good data for that will mean that we'll have a relatively high confidence in that condition assessment. The same for seagrass. We've got obviously the long-term data set. There'll be some attributes that will be less confident on, for example, some of the extent data for seagrass. You know, we may not have the same level of confidence in that because of the historic monitoring methods or survey methods for that. But in terms of Scilly, we're relatively confident that it will be direct monitoring that will inform those condition assessments, unlike for many other sites where sometimes we will have to look at vulnerability assessments, best available evidence and expert judgment. So it's a combination of different aspects that we'll look at. But for Scilly, we're in a pretty confident position on those. With some of the MCZs, it may not be the same. And this is where, you know, we do struggle to secure the budget to do that direct monitoring on some of those sites. And I think that this is where the MPA review possibly comes in and looks at how, with a limited budget, you do that direct monitoring for those sites and how you monitor and whether you choose a certain number of sites that will act as a proxy for others. And that's all open to discussion because, you know, the budget impacts will be significant. And, you know, this year we've had very little monitoring budget to be able to use. And also, I think with Scilly, thinking about the Owen Exeter's project. So he's now published a number of reports, and I think he's made some recommendations around monitoring specific to Scilly, which would be really helpful to pick up on. Thank you.
Thank you for your report. No problem. Thank you very much for your report. Agenda item 13, the Chief Officer's update.
Oh, lucky, last one. Sorry, we've kept it's now, you know, it's 7:20. I'll keep this one brief. Yeah, this is just sort of like a brief update of officer activity over the last quarter since the last meeting. Obviously, you know, I'd like to give my thanks to Rick for all his work while I'm not here. So he's holding the fort for us all the time. Yeah, so just moving through some of these items we've already discussed. You know, we've issued I've issued two permits now against the thing. Only one's been operational. As you can see at the time of writing, which was some weeks ago now, because of the submission of papers, at that point 140 recreational pop tags had been purchased, and we've had quite a few more since then. So that will keep totting up. There have been a few few patrols targeting those just to make sure that that bylaw is being adhered to, and Rick's done quite well in highlighting some and putting some notices on them, and then obviously that's generated sales of pop tags for us, which is good. Again, just noting the Plymouth work at the end of May and beginning of June, and I think they really lucked out with the weather that time. I think they managed to actually get all of the stations covered this time, which was great. You noticed we've taken on a fixed term appointment to cover the busy summer period to get into with our monitoring requirements. So that's great. That's underway now, and it was originally going to be a 0.6 full-time equivalent per appointment, but it's going to be changing to full-time next month, which is great. And obviously, you know, as members, you'll be delighted that Vigilant finally came back home at the end of April. Wasn't really, although she was ready to come back, the mooring wasn't ready, so it was just thought we might as well just get her back as soon as the mooring's ready. So she's now ready and just working on the final processes and procedures for compliance with Workboat Code 3, so that for next year's annual survey, she'll be compliant and we'll have everything in place by then. Again, looking the storage, we'll be looking to have to relocate next year potentially. So that's all underway. And I think sort of in terms of fishing reports, I think one of the biggest disappointments was the lower than expected crawfish price at the beginning of on the 1st of June. But I think there was probably a little bit of expectation of large quantities landed on the this Monday, the 2nd of June. Yeah, so, but I think my understanding, Rick's been sort of like really good at diligent at sort of keeping contact with everybody, and we don't seem to be seeing the numbers of octopus here that seem to be affecting crustacean fisheries on the mainland at the moment. There definitely is and I will look at Emily, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it does definitely seem to be a westward. It seems to be sort of like moving along. I think it's sort of peaking as it's going along. Certainly, I had a report of Falmouth Bay being really bad at the moment today.
Yeah, so I think it's Falmouth and East seems to be really bad. Falmouth and West doesn't seem to be so bad at the moment, but I should imagine as the summer goes on and things warm up a little bit, they'll start to shift around the lizard.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, certainly reports of, I had one a couple of weeks ago, somebody sent me a picture of 10 octopus in a single pot that they'd hauled. You know, and I mean, yes, it's quite a lucrative bycatch with the market, but you know, it's the impact that is being, you know, to sort of crustacean stocks in there, isn't it, as well? So much we can do on that. Correct me, I think at the time of writing, Emily, pollock was an unavoidable bycatch of 150 kilos a month.
It still is.
Very lovely, thank you. And CFAS have been working with ICs to introduce a new assessment model based on a new benchmarking. Seems to have been tested quite widely, and they're looking to implement for next year for a stock assessment.
Yeah.
Sorry to look at you.
No, you're fine. Yeah, correct. Yeah, correct. Probably on the pollock side of things as well, if you're okay for me to just check in.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, please do.
There are ongoing conversations with DEFRA sort of every other week, really, at the moment, to try and push for measures on the recreational sector. At the moment, they're just pushing for the voluntary measures which have been promoted by the Angling Trust, but we have been kind of heavily advocating for management on the recreational sector as well, but so far to no avail. Although hopefully, moving forward, we'll see some measures on the recreational fleet as well. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. And sort of finally, just again, we've been lucky to have had a commercial tuna license awarded to the district, which is great. Another one would have been even better, but one's good. So yeah, that's basically just a brief roundup. If anyone's got any questions about any activity or anything coming up, please fire away. Silence.
I'll just go from the chair, just while you're on that with the team, just thanks to Ches and Richie,
Yep.
Ricky and Richard and yourself. So we've got a good team of 4. Any other questions for Colin? No? Thank you for all attending, those online, and I will close the meeting. Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't write a report, but I just had a couple things to bring up, if that's okay, before we finish.
Carry on.
Sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
But just to say that the FAS funding has reopened. There's £6 million available for all sorts, so refrigeration, vehicles, boat modifications, quayside modifications. The list is quite kind of extensive, so have a look on the FAS funding website, because there is a lot of money available, and it would be really helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of people on the islands to get funding for things that they need. So please do have a look at that. And I suppose it's worth mentioning also just about the recreational bluefin tuna fishery, which is going to open this year, which I'm sure there will be people fishing in Scilly or get permits in Scilly for the recreational bluefin tuna fishery. This year they will be required to fly flags. So the vessels you see targeting bluefin tuna here recreationally should be flying flags. If they're not, then we would obviously very much like to know about that. Thanks.
Yeah, Colin was.
Presumably this will be changing every year, like the chart. Yeah. So it's a follow on from the chart program. Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, that's just another update. I was hoping Dale was going to be attending today from the harbour. Quite excited about the Waterhall recycling of previously enjoyed fishing gear. I think they're just about ready to get some of the bins out on some of the off islands
They are,
now, with the hope to get them. Yeah, and just waiting to get everything lined up to get the first shipment ashore back to the mainland, I believe. So moving forward, so yeah, great initiative, and yeah, great that it's actually working out as well.
Another good story. Yeah. Okay, thank you again all for attending the meeting, and I will close the meeting at 7:25. Thank you.